the future of our brain. So this is one of the most eminent neuroscientists who is our guest. He will be speaking about the model of information exchange at the neural level and how the brain-computer interfaces can make the brain and the machine into one. Please welcome Newton Howard from the University of Oxford.
It is my distinct pleasure to be here in Vienna, in Austria, the land where many talents and many experience had been announced and displayed in the world. I feel that the topic is very suited to actually speak about it from this wonderful land. The topic of today is near and dear to my heart, which is the discussion of the future of our brain. But before we know the future of our brain, we must talk about the past also of our brain. This whole area have opened, the area of brain sciences has opened a world of opportunities that was not available before, or perhaps was encapsulated into one or fewer disciplines. For example, in AI, the idea of modeling after the brain distinctly make available resources that was not available before. Eric Schmidt, for example, in the data area of the brain sciences, said that in 2 days, we would have more data since the dawn of civilization. What's interesting about that is that the dawn of civilization and data create somewhat of a conundrum, because data is referring to a very specific and unique things that relates to the computational ingest of data. The brain, just on the data part, opens an entire set of questions that were not available before. Meaning, in the smallest element of the brain, and it's not the synaptic level, but let's say on two synapses communication or neurons communicating, we are talking about an enormous amount of data throughput that is not quite understood yet, or the meaning of it. When, for example, we look at the assumptions of the old brain, these questions go all the way back to Aristotle, Raphaelis, and their students, where they actually wanted to understand where is the seat of conscience. To them, it meant actually looking at 3 places: the heart, the gut, and what we know inside the cortex of the brain. 2,000 years later, we are discovering items and information about the brain that conforms to these facts, that we carry an item in each one of us, the brain that is, that defies basic assumptions, that defies standard physics. So what do we know about it? When it comes to power consumption, for example, we know that the throughput of the brain, the cognitive throughput, far exceeds anything that we know in our computers today, far exceeds anything that we can model. If we were to model the prefrontal cortex of a cat, we would need a near nuclear power reaction to actually see all the happening in that space. The cooling system extends from here to the moon and back, all in 3 pounds enigma. Yet there is enough space to have 300 billion neurons, with each neuron carries 10,000 dendrites with a geometry of the density of 10 to the minus 16th, which is the known distance in the positive integers to the known universe. The brain, like any other organ, is plagued with certain problems, certain disorders. Let's say we can talk about, or we can span around 160 to 200 different types of disorders. Today, in order to correct some of these disorders, we resort to pharmacological agents. Pharmacological agents, they're like playing whack-a-mole. You use one agent for anxiety, it increases depression. You use one agent for depression, it increases OCD, and so forth. So why is that? Because the brain is not just a single currency, or does not exchange one currency in its information exchange. It actually operates in multiple modalities. The chemical or the neurotransmitters modality is just one. There exists also the electrophysiological modality, which is using the currency of electrons. There exists the quantum modality, which uses the photons or light as a mean to communicate between them. The latter is two items that actually come to existence only in the last 100 years or so. So this wonderful organ of 3 pounds that uses 20% of the power in the body is essentially an electrical, optical, and a chemical machine. In order to understand how it communicates with each other, we need to understand the language of the brain, or the language of the inner exchange model, leading us to the investigation of what I refer to as the fundamental code unit, a concept of which allow us to read the brain and write back to the brain. If I may explain this in terms of the ISO model of the computer, on the lowest level, we have assembly language that is uniformly operating on all the machines. And then you build layers on the top of it, all the way to the comprehensive layer, where you actually see a display, a computer synthesis of voice or other outputs. The FCU plays the same function in this case, similar to that of the assembly language in the brain. It also provides another function, and that is, if I were to say that a human can fly from New York City to Vienna or Paris just with their existing earthly suit, their body, that would be relatively impossible, because it defies the laws of physics, the laws of biology, and the capacity of human as a person. However, if I were to invent an object of which I can put the human encapsulated in this object, the object conforms to the laws of physics, conforms to biological laws, and so forth, then it is entirely possible for a person to get from New York to Vienna or Paris or European city inside this flying or floating object. What are we dealing with here essentially is, in brain sciences, is creating these tools that make it possible for us to explore the reading and writing of the human brain. Another metaphor to explain brain language is to think of Morse code. In Morse code, we get some very simple, predefined characters that assembles to much more sophisticated and complex meanings. It is very efficient, because if there's two people sitting on the top of a mountain facing each other and they wanted to communicate with each other vocally, the voice would dissipate because of the distance. If you throw some object, it would be the same. However, if you single with a flash of light, you're able to transmit an enormous amount of communication or information across that medium to the other side with very little effort and fewer characters. That brings me to the point of some of the work that we've been putting together, which is the ability to write and read from the brain and write to the brain. And in order to do that, you can do this in two types of resolutions, either spatial resolution that is light or deeper resolution that requires us to get into the depth of the brain. So we broke this into two categories: the non-invasive methods of BCI, or brain-computer interface, and the invasive method of BCI, or brain-computer interface, also known as DPS, or deep brain stimulation. This technology is in use today. The problem with the current state of the art is that is relatively barbaric and difficult to utilize without harming the brain further and not achieving the total objective. So to come up with a way to understand and do this, we developed two classes of technology. One is a BCI, referred to as brain cipher, which is the ability to actually read the brain through EEG with a high resolution quantitative EEG, mapping the regions of the brain, specifically focusing on the areas that have deficit, being able to conduct a modulation pattern, which is a set of electrical parameters that basically in reverse goes to the brain to stimulate through transcranial direct current and correct the problem of the brain or the disorder that we're addressing. The second item is using something of a more invasive nature, which is the DPS or the BCI, getting deeper into the cortex all the way to layer 5 with what we refer to as the kiwi chip. This is an image of the non-invasive brain modulation device with the ability to do high quantitative EEG, correcting approximately up to 168 different disorders with as little as 20 minutes a day, several weeks of use, with limited side effect and the ability to actually enhance the capacity of the human brain. We continued the development into the kiwi chip because you get to the higher resolution in doing so, and you can get to layers like layer 5, which deep into the cortex. And in doing so, you are able to correct even more severe problems by placing these type of chips into places like the basal ganglia or the subthalamic nucleus of the brain, and treating disorders like Parkinson, Alzheimer, Huntington. Our current model focused on Parkinson because it has the most established understanding and comparable matrix, if you will, a gold standard. So to sum it, the current state of the art brings you into these two classification of brain-computer interface and DBS, the invasive and the non-invasive. One of the very important things is to understand that the non-invasive can get you only to a certain resolution. The kiwi chip, however, is like traveling into the inner space of the brain and being able to capture this communication that is structured in the fundamental code unit and express the meanings of that communication so that we understand how to, with precision, turn on or off a specific circuit in the brain. Meaning that for a person that suffers from, example, a depression or PTSD, we're able to narrow down a structural area that has the problem, reprogram the function, and then see the expressions of that in the behavioral level of this person that is normalized to a level where the person is not suffering from this disorder any further. So, without laboring the capacity of the kiwi, it is not only a clinical device, it is also a prosthetic or a brain augmentation strategy. See, some people try to reverse understanding the brain or engineering things, machines to assimilate like the brain. The fundamental approach here is that we focus on restoring the human dignity through empowering the very brain that we have and removing and annihilating some of the disease state that affects that human capacity. As such, we're restoring human dignity. That's the vision of the Kiwi and the BCI that we work on my research agenda. So the future uses of such technology is that we can decode languages of the brain, further being able to learn language faster, and eventually use this technology in healthy patients as a brain augmentation strategy to enhance human capabilities and to restore human dignity. Thank you very much for listening, and now I will receive questions.